Hello, folks, and welcome to the September 2024 Third Tuesday Talk presented by the Cape Cod and Islands Group's Sierra Club Cape Cod and Island Group Executive Committee. And tonight's topic is Sand Wars, Adverse Consequences of Onshore Mining and Coastal Use in Massachusetts. We have two great speakers tonight. Very excited about that. My cat has just showed up for tonight's event, so that's a big endorsement. Just so you understand, sand mining and use has been ongoing on Cape Cod in southeastern Massachusetts forever. A lot of it is associated with the cranberry industry, and we now have sort of a new industry that has developed on the back of the cranberry industry, especially in southeastern Massachusetts. But here on Cape Cod, we've had borrow pits forever. I came to this issue more than a decade ago when I was interested and concerned about a solar energy project here in Brewster that was proposed for watershed protection land in the eastern part of our town. And I went out there to look at the forest that was going to be clear cut with interest in opposing solar development. And I looked next door to this beautiful forest, and there was this massive sand pit with ongoing mining operations, with the sole source aquifer exposed in the middle of the summer, with very little regulation. And having spent lots of time on the beach in Brewster, I saw where a lot of the sand was going, and it could be placed one day and literally washed away the next. And so I've questioned this extractive mining approach and this sort of somewhat feckless, in some instances, use approach to this critically limited resource. And I'm glad that this issue has now risen to the fore in southeastern Massachusetts, with both concerns about sand extraction and also about how the sand is being used. So our first speaker tonight is Meg Sheehan, and Meg is a public interest environmental attorney and community organizer, the co-author of Sand Wars in Cranberry Country, and co-founder of the Community Land and Water Coalition and many other organizations. And Meg is really leading advocacy for a moratorium on sand mining in southeastern Massachusetts. And so Meg is going to be our first presenter. I'll introduce our second presenter later. But again, I want to thank everybody for coming. Chris Powicki from Brewster, Massachusetts. And Meg, I'm going to turn the controls over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Chris. I will share my screen and start my presentation. Can you see that? Let's see. Did I do that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for having me. As Chris said, my name is Meg Sheehan. I'm originally from Plymouth. And like Chris, I've been concerned about this issue for over 10 years. I'm now one of the co-founders of Community Land and Water Coalition. One of our main projects is exposing sand mining, the harms, the silent environmental crisis, and defending people and the environment. And we do this in all kinds of ways: organizing, educating, and of course, advocacy and using the courts. I will put this in a global context. As you can see, sand is a global issue. Sand mining, it's the second most extracted resource on Earth by volume after water. And the United Nations has established recently the Global Sand Observatory to try to get a handle on unregulated sand mining. And they're saying that sand resource governance is one of the greatest sustainability challenges of the 21st century. And that is exactly what we're dealing with in southeastern Mass and in Massachusetts and on the Cape, is governance. There isn't much. That's what we're trying to dive into with our report. And I'll just play the short version of our film. We produced this short video to accompany our Sand Wars report, which is available on sandwars.org. This is on our YouTube channel, which is Southeastern Mass Pine Barrens. And there we also have over 200 drone videos and recordings because we've been documenting the 100, at least 100 sand mining sites for the past 4 years. So I will play the short version of the video. It's about 4 minutes, and you can find out more in the report, but here we go.
Hundreds of millions of dollars worth of aggregate is being mined and exported from southeastern Massachusetts, and no one knows how much. Our government regulators are letting this happen with no environmental assessment or enforcement. It exposes about 100 mining sites in the region, and many more have evaded discovery. The investigation results from years of evidence collection, eyewitness reports, drone surveillance, public records, and personal experiences of residents and the work of community, land, and water coalition. Sand is the second most exploited natural resource in the world after water. The network of sand mining companies exploits the cranberry agriculture myth to run large industrial operations skirting the law. This is strip mining, not cranberry agriculture or normal land development. It has all the devastating impacts of strip mining. Forests are clear-cut, stumps and roots are ripped from the ground, and soils are scraped off and hauled away. Entire ecosystems are being destroyed. The trees, vegetation, and sand and gravel filter and protect the aquifer. Leveling hills changes water flows on the surface of the land and below the ground, exposing the groundwater to contamination. This is the ancestral lands of the indigenous Wampanoag people, whose people and archaeology is still here. Wampanoag Native American sites are recklessly desecrated by mining operations. Government officials recklessly allow sand to blow off the sites into the community and environment for years. Sand covers their cars year after year. Sand fills the gutters on their homes. They can't open their windows. They experience ear-shattering noise from rock crushing and gravel sorting and feel the earth move under their feet from trucks and equipment. Investigations document that over the last 30 years, about 58 million cubic yards has been hauled away. Strip mining 2,500 acres, 100 sites, 2.3 million truckloads, at times more than 1 truck a minute on local roads, enough to circle the globe 1.3 times. The investigation exposes cranberry industry because about 75% of the mining is done by companies claiming to be cranberry growers. Cranberry companies own 62,000 acres, but only about 23% of it grows cranberries. The rest is forested uplands with sand and gravel deposits. Sand mining is a lot easier and far more profitable than selling cranberries. Cranberry farming is break-even business at best, and the demand for cranberries flats as consumers reject the sugar-laden products and health benefit claims are not scientifically proven, according to the US Food and Drug Administration. Reed Custom Soils in Carver, reported to be the largest aggregate mining and distribution facility in Northeast United States. There is many ways to extract sand. The most problematic way is river sand mining, here dredging sand and gravel from the aquifer. To exploit a loophole for land development, some mining companies claim to level mountains of sand to put in subdivision roads, like this in Carver that claimed that the highest hill in town needed to be leveled for an innovative business park of self-storage warehouses. Or this site on Route 3 in Plymouth that town officials claim is just preparing the land for a manufacturing building. The investigation exposes what residents have known for decades. Government officials at the highest level and throughout the state's environmental agencies have known about this, but have done nothing. Put a moratorium on all sand and gravel mining. Contact your local state and federal office to speak out for clean drinking water and livable communities.
So that's our short video. And okay. I'm gonna,
Hundreds of
I have to go to the next slide, I guess. Okay. So it's a really powerful story, and it's a result of, as we said, years of citizen boots on the ground investigations. And in fact, some of our photographers are on the call. But the report goes into great detail exposing the hidden costs and harms of sand mining. And those are summarized here. I'll particularly focus on eliminating the drinking water filtration, since on the Cape you have the same issues with your sole source aquifer. And it's well known, it's a scientific fact, that our forests, our soils, and the sand and gravel filter and protect the aquifer. And when we cart it away by the truckload, year after year, decade after decade, we are robbing ourselves of that filtration protection, and it will be very, very expensive to try to clean up that water, as some of the towns on the Cape know. Impacts on biodiversity, Native American culture, economic impacts. A lot of these cranberry companies use the real estate tax exemptions that let them pay almost no taxes. And there's no protection for the people. You saw the houses, that's carcinogenic silica sand. And the United States agency that regulates mining operations protects you if you're a sand mine worker. However, there are no standards in Massachusetts or federally for people who live next to these silica sand mines and who are exposed day after day, year after year to the silica sand. And of course, there are climate impacts from the emissions, the soil removal, impacts for flooding, etc. And you can read more in our report, as I mentioned. I really want to highlight the environmental justice impacts. This is a map that shows in different colors here, environmental justice communities in southeastern Mass in this small area, but most of these are in environmental justice communities. The truck routes, the millions of trucks that are going through these roads are going through environmental justice communities. And you can see the big green spot there in the middle. That's in South Carver and part of Wareham. And that is ground zero for most of the sand mining. It's land owned by A.D. Makepeace, where there's 2 square miles of sand mines, leaving a sacrifice zone. So there have been no environmental impact studies under MEPA, no archaeological assessments for 99% of these, and what archaeological assessments are done are mere one-page window dressing, no air pollution controls. People are exposed to excessive noise and vibration, which of course impacts health and well-being. There's no safety precautions from the excessive truck traffic. Some neighborhoods, and especially in South Carver, are so hemmed in that people actually cannot leave their neighborhoods. Some of these industrial mining sites completely surround mobile home parks, and people can't even go into town to do their grocery shopping without encountering this truck traffic. But no studies, no problem, says Governor Healy. We met with them the governor's office in EEA last year. We delivered a petition this year. No problem. They don't see any violations. And we're really asking why there's no action by any of these state agencies. And it's really, something that we need to do something about on a state level. We really want to try to connect the dots with some of these uses. Where does your sand come from? This is a typical industrial mine. This is not a cranberry bog. It's not just a borrow pit on the back 40. The uses include not only the beach nourishment, but green roofs, golf courses, beach armoring, and asphalt and concrete plants, of course. Focusing on beach nourishment, because this is the focus of the talk. One example that we've researched very thoroughly, and you can see it on our website, Community Land and Water Coalition, is Plymouth's $2.9 million taxpayer-funded beach nourishment project overseen by Coastal Zone Management, allegedly for protecting the public piping plovers. That was one excuse. And while this was happening in 2023, people were, seeing all the heavy equipment on the beach. And I just happened to go there one day and I could see not only all the trucks coming from Carver, delivering the sand, but the sand actually blowing out to sea as the trucks were rolling in. This was done by A.D. Makepeace's affiliate, Reed Custom Soils, that has one of the region's largest aggregate mining and distribution facilities in South Carver, behind closed doors with a permit exemption from the Town of Carver Earth Removal Committee. The other one that is happening now, you might have read about this in the newspaper recently in 2024, $600,000 worth of sand was washed away from Salisbury Beach on the North Shore. Now the state has come through and they're going to spend $2 million of taxpayer money to re-nourish that beach. It's still going on. More and more projects are being permitted. 2 huge projects for almost $50 million worth of sand and gravel have recently been permitted in Carver. Plymouth's on the verge of approving this new project in South Plymouth and Cedarville. It involves a 501c3 that's an arm of the town that has taken this tax title land to do sand mining on. So we're really trying to expose the corruption and what's going on at the town halls, where this is all regulated because it is, of course, a local land use and the governor just says hands off. So we have been trying to get some press. We are delivering our petition. We're still collecting signatures. We're going to be bringing these around to boards of selectmen in Southeastern Mass. Happy to come to the Cape and talk about the issue too, and urge you to sign our petition, which you can find on Action Network and on our website. Join or subscribe to the newsletter and donate. And thank you very much.
Hi, Meg. Thanks very much for that presentation. I think what we're going to do is have Ashley go ahead and present, and then we'll open it up for questions on both the supply side and the use side. So Ashley, whenever you're ready to go with your presentation, go ahead and start sharing and I'll introduce you. Our next speaker is Ashley Arisman, a member of the Nantucket Coastal Conservancy, nonprofit based on the island. And also Ashley was the former chair of the Nantucket Conservation Committee. Ashley earned a Master of Environmental Studies from University of Pennsylvania based on her thesis, Erosion Control, Sustainability, and Sea Level Rise, a critical evaluation of Nantucket Island's planning for coastal resilience. I'm not sure what was in the thesis, but apparently the Nantucket Select Board was not happy with Ashley's expertise and passion in leading the Conservation Commission. Ashley was not reappointed, in part because of her willingness to stand the line on behalf of resource protection. And so, Ashley, the floor is yours. Thanks so much for being here tonight.
Well, thank you very much for having me. So I am going to describe to everybody a big coastal erosion project that has taken place on Nantucket. The beginning of this project actually jump-started my participation with the Nantucket Conservation Commission. It got me going to meetings, eventually applying and then being appointed to that commission. So the picture on the screen is a cheeky little drawing by a Nantucket woman, Catherine Stover, when sand was just beginning to really be mined from the Nantucket sand pits and delivered to 2 projects, one on the west side of Nantucket, the other on the east side. And I'm going to focus really on this east side project. So back in, or some background, I guess. So the Sconset Bluff is on the east side of Nantucket. The heights of the bluff average around 80 feet. And the erosion rate there is really anywhere from 1 to 4 feet per year. Just remember that that's an average. So one year they might have nothing, and then one year they might have 15 feet. So there have been a variety of efforts on this bluff to protect it from erosion over the years, dewatering, all sorts of things over decades. And then in the spring of 2013, there had been some catastrophic erosion in that area. Essentially, I believe 2 structures fell over, needed to be demolished, and Baxter Road came within 25 feet of the bluff. So that puts it in imminent danger of undermining and becomes a town infrastructure problem. So at this point, the Sconset Beach Preservation Fund partnered with the town of Nantucket to put forward a geotube installation. The idea behind this geotube installation is that it would start with a roughly 900-foot section and expand over time to be about 4,000 feet of geotube armoring. As the town was working through this process, there were some more erosion events and some storms coming. So on November 26, 2013, Sconset Bluff Preservation Fund filed for an emergency certification to get their geotubes in. So they actually separated from the town, and this jump-started my participation because as like a master's student, I thought, wow, the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, having this really important meeting, will anybody be able to go? What's going to happen here? So essentially, through the emergency certification process, the State Department of Environmental Protection ultimately allowed for a geotube installation. So what had been proposed was a 4-tier installation of geotubes. The bottom tier here you can see is actually excavated into the beach, and then 3 tiers going up back. This as-built is how the geotubes actually sat. Ultimately, during the original emergency installation, they only put in 3 tiers of geotubes. So not the protection that they had hoped for, but still a massive project. So the geotextile tube installation is a massive construction project for someone who grew up on Nantucket, and I grew up on Nantucket. Our natural beaches and the erosive processes is something beautiful to watch. And then to kind of see the beach turned into, truly a construction site was kind of heartbreaking, I must admit. But they have to go in, they excavate the beach in order to put in the bottom row of geotubes. During that excavation, they essentially create a water pit of sand. From that sand slurry, they fill the bottom geotube with sand. And then the subsequent geotubes are filled with sand from excavation sites. So these are just some photos, again, of the construction process. This took a few weeks. And again, what natural beach was there is, really destroyed in this process. Just some more construction photos. This is from the top of the bank. Sand is delivered here, and then kind of shot over the bank. And here you can see where they've excavated to get the sand slurry for that bottom tube. During this process, there was, as you can see, interaction with tidal water, which did become an issue with the Army Corps of Engineers because they are not supposed to be excavating in the tidal zone. And of course, this photo shows evidence that they did. So actually executing this project per the permit was very difficult for Sconset Bluff. So when the emergency project was completed, It was mitigated with 22 cubic yards of sand per linear foot. So upon completion of this project, just for the initial emergency installation and covering, it took over 39,000 cubic yards of sand. At that time, sand cost $27 per cubic yard. To my knowledge, they were using all island sand at that point, and it cost a little over $1 million. This project took 1,700, a little over 1,700 dump truck loads. So that, damages the roads, it's adding CO2 to the atmosphere, and then those trucks need to go all the way back. So you double that for things like road damage. And at this point, the project costs roughly $3 million. So within a couple of years of the initial install, it was clear that there was end scouring occurring. So on the ends, and I think I have a photo later on of a hard armored structure, the water essentially can work its way behind and erode behind the structure. So when it was noticed that they were having end scour, they came in with an amended proposal to add returns to essentially kind of return the geotubes into the bluff to prevent end scour. They also applied for a 4th tier of geotubes, and the construction continued. So many of these projects were actually denied by our local conservation commission. They were appealed by Sconset Bluff and then upheld by the Department of Environmental Protection, and we were handed down superseding orders of conditions. So again, in this photo, you can see just more construction, desecration of the beach, with the porta potty there. You can gauge the scale of the sacrificial sand delivery with this person, at the top of the bluff, and then just endless truckload after truckload of sand delivery, or so it seemed. And so again, just more photos of kind of moving sand and changes to the system. This photo again shows the sand delivery area, what's known as kind of the sacrificial sand here, and the top of the sand template. What you might notice from this photo is there actually aren't a lot of houses being protected by the current geotubes. It's mostly road infrastructure at this point. So in 2017, after some of the upgrades, you would think that people would be wising up and maybe wouldn't want to build or buy houses on an eroding bluff, but that is not the case. So the one kind of true residence that sits above the geotubes back in 2017 sold for, almost $900,000, which on Nantucket, unfortunately, is like pennies these days. But for a property that might just have, 5 years left, it's a lot of money. And you can see the house that sold in these 3 pictures, perched above the geotubes, really depending on that protection. And now, this property owner is fighting to keep the geotubes in and to expand them because, they're worried they'll lose their property, which seems a little crazy since they bought it on an eroding bluff. So in 2018, these were kind of the new geotube statistics. It sat at 947 linear feet with the returns and the 4th tube completed. It requires roughly 20,000, just over 20,000 cubic yards of sand per year, over 1,000 truckloads of sand required per year. Sand costs were increasing at this point, and mitigation costs per year over $600,000. So that's just for the sand for the 900-foot installation. Again, you can see that little house that sold for like $900,000, the geotube sand delivery area, and the template. So when this sand is going over the geotubes, it sits on top of the geotubes and then has to cover the front of them. The covering on the front of the geotubes is important for a few things. The tubes need to stay covered so they don't photodegrade, but they also need to stay covered with sand so that the geotubes mimic the sediment that would be contributed naturally from an eroding bluff, right? So if storms were interacting with a bluff without geotubes, it would be contributing sand and sediment to the system. And that sand and sediment moves to downdrift beaches and actually diminishes kind of the storm wave energy when it's saturated with sand. And what happens here is when the sacrificial sand template is gone, these geotubes act like a hard structure. So you can see in this picture here, the geotubes are exposed, water comes up and hits them, it reflects. There's a lot more wave energy in that case, a lot more erosion, more end scour, and there's no sand being contributed to nourish downdrift beaches. So when the structure is uncovered, it has real consequences to surrounding areas. And you can just see here, this is another cheeky cartoon by a Nantucket man, just kind of laughing at SBPF dumping these trucks into the sea. And then these photos just kind of proving the point, the art is imitating life or life imitating art. Again, you can see the base of the geotubes and the storm activity. So in this case, the geotubes are completely exposed. Downdrift beaches are not getting sediment contribution. And you can see all this template sand that's actually just sitting there. So that's been problematic for us. We're talking about loss of sand, but for the natural beach environment, you actually need that sand to be accessible to the ocean to act like a natural system. And this one does not. So again, just another photo. This, I think, really demonstrates the narrowing of the beach over time as well. Where we are seeing more wave activity at the base of the geotubes on a regular basis than we did before. And there is, evidence demonstrating a narrowing of that beach. And in this photo, you can actually see a dropping of the beach as well, because this is that bottom geotube that's actually buried within the beach that's now become exposed. So that just shows the amount of sediment that's been lost, and then the amount of sediment that was not available because it's on top of these geotubes for the actual beach system. So in 2018, Sconset Beach Preservation Fund wanted an expansion. So this expansion would require more than 83,000 cubic yards of sand per year. And at this time, of the proposal, the island sand pits, had anywhere between 400 and 700,000 cubic yards of sand left. So when you look at that information, the Nantucket sand pits, if they were supplying just this project, would only have 4.8 to 8.4 years of sand supply remaining. So when you think about the functioning of an island and sustainability, does all the sand go to this one project, or do we, try and conserve this precious resource? So this expanded project, and sorry, I should go back, was denied by the Nantucket Conservation Commission. It was appealed by Sconset Bluff, went to the DEP at the state. The DEP approved the project. And then it sat in legal limbo and eventually got pulled by Sconset Bluff for a different project coming up the road. But the Department of Environmental Protection is approving these things. So in 2019, they delivered contaminated material to the site. I think this was due to the fact that they were desperate, not having access to island sand pits. This material actually came from island development sites. So big housing development, they'd excavate from there and just bring the material and dumped it over the bluff. They were caught doing that. This is not beach compatible material. Obviously, this causes problems for the beach system when you have all sorts of debris. It was loaded with construction debris and actually had a funny smell. So you worry that, you know, if we are not wise with our sand resources, people are going to get desperate and dump material like this where they shouldn't be. So we really do need to conserve, you know, what we have. So they went through some enforcement proceedings with this, ultimately no chemicals. And then fast forward to 2021, it came to light that Sconset Bluff had not been putting the mitigation sand on that they were supposed to. So they were deficient in their mitigation sand. And after lots of proceedings, the Conservation Commission actually ordered the system removed. That went through appeals. Ultimately, a judge in Superior Court upheld our decision in 2022 to remove the geotubes for, you know, lack of mitigation sand and a variety of reasons behind that. And unfortunately, the geotubes remain in place to this day. You know, one of the interesting things as we got into removal proceedings is they claimed they can't actually get the geotubes out because now it's so dangerous for the road and houses above. So despite putting these things in and saying they could be removed with an X-Acto knife, you know, now they seem to be stuck there permanently, or so it seems. You can see here in this graphic just how deficient they are in sand. So again, this came to light to the Nantucket Conservation Commission in 2020 that they were deficient and had been deficient for years. And if you catch up to today, you know, they're deficient over 118,000 cubic yards of sand. So when you think about that missing sand from the system, it's obviously having impacts up and down the beach and, you know, in front of the actual geotubes. So what the data tells us, we have seen, and this is according to Woods Hole Group, this is a lovely graphic by Doug Rose that was submitted to the Conservation Commission. We do see accelerated erosion north of the geotubes. It's almost tripled in some areas. In front of the geotubes, the walkable beach has narrowed by approximately 57% in the 7 years since the geotubes were installed. And the toe of the bluff at the north end has receded roughly 24 feet since the geotubes were installed. So we're seeing issues up and down the beach. And unfortunately, with these projects, it can be difficult to prove, you know, that that grain of sand was missing from that area of bluff. So again, it's problematic. Unfortunately, the town is still in it to win it with Sconset Bluff, and they are still trying to pursue an expansion. I was removed from the Conservation Commission June 2023. So this new expansion has come since then. These are pictures from this winter. So part of the expansion is going to require Sconset Bluff to come into compliance to make up that mitigation sand, and they've started trying to do that. So over the winter, sand was barged in. So approximately 3,300 tons of sand was delivered in February. This material did come from a borrow pit in Plymouth, I learned. And then the sand was loaded into trucks, driven to New Bedford, barged from New Bedford to Nantucket, loaded onto more trucks, driven out to Sconset, and dumped over the bluff. So you can see this is, you know, what the sand looked like when it was delivered. The ocean is just coming up right there, so it's going to be washed away. You know, and that's kind of where we are in this potential expansion with the town that should be decided within the next couple of weeks. So they might need more sand there. And that is it. I hope I didn't speak too long on this topic. Thank you for having me.
Hi, Ashley. That was a really fantastic presentation, and you as well, Meg. I think we've seen there are some concerns both where the sand is coming from and where it's going. I encourage folks who have questions to raise hands and unmute and go ahead and ask your questions once I call on you. Just Ashley, one question I had for you. Can you describe what the geotextile tubes are made of?
Yeah, so it is like a polyfiber material. I don't know if you have ever worn like a surfing wetsuit. It's basically like a thick wetsuit material. And when it's filled with sand, it is rock hard. But it is plastic. It gives off microplastics. And we've asked about potential PFAS in there and haven't gotten a great answer, but maybe.
So you mean Nantucket's encouraging the application of plastics on the beach? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to avoid it, but geotubes contribute microplastics, so.
Sure. David Dow, you have a question. Go ahead, please. And make sure you unmute yourself. David, I'm going to put you on hold and go to Jerry Williams. Jerry, if you have a question, please go ahead, unmute yourself.
Question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We own property down on the Outer Banks of North Carolina as well, right on the ocean. And they have been doing beach nourishment there for about 10 years. However, they take the sand from sandbars about a mile or two offshore. Has Nantucket thought about looking for where this sand is washing out to and then trying to mine it, and with big dredges? What they did was they have big dredges and then it's pumped onto shore, and it's not cheap, but it's no more, I can't imagine it's more expensive really than what you're doing. But it's just a thought that the looking for and this sand matches very well. You wouldn't even know that it wasn't the original sand. They look for sand that matches. They've replenished twice now, once 10 years ago and about 4 or 5 years ago again.
Yes, so Nantucket is looking to that Sconset Beach Preservation Fund specifically for them to do their expansion project. The fourth phase of it will require dredge sand. So they need a lot of permitting through the state to do that. One of the issues is off of Sconset Bluff, there's really unique cobble habitat that's very important for the local fisheries. So that's been a real fisheries issue for the locals. And if the sand was to be dredged, it would be coming from pretty far offshore. And then where is it to be stored? So that is working through for the future.
Meg, did you want to address that question as well?
Sure. I'm not an expert on this, but I know there are ecological impacts of offshore dredging. I'm not a limnologist who knows about the creatures that live in between the grains of sand, but there are such creatures. So I think that there are a lot of questions that would be asked about the ecological impacts of dredging offshore to put it on the land as well.
Thanks. The state has not permitted a lot of offshore mining sites. It did recently permit something off of the beach just to the west of Sandwich, where the natural littoral transport was interrupted by Cape Cod Canal's jetties. And so the beaches to the east of Cape Cod Canal were suffering accelerated erosion. And so the state did ultimately, in conjunction with the Army Corps of Engineers, which has paid for the project, allow for a new sand mining operation to send send sand around the canal and then onto the beach in Sandwich. And Sierra Club did discuss that project and thought that in a case like this, It was not something that we were interested in opposing, primarily because Sandwich was sand starved due to the coarse jetties. But this is an issue that Sierra Club chapters around the country are facing and are involved in is beach nourishment. Anybody else have any questions, or did you have another one, Jerry?
No, as I said, this was matching sand, and they
Yep.
only had to bring it in about 2 miles. And it was better than, we're just on a sand spit there, a barrier island. So it was better than trying to move sand. They had done that in the past. They had taken sand when they were dredging the sound and pumped it across the island and put it on the beaches, but it was really ugly. It didn't match, and it didn't stay put. It was very, very fine, silty sand. So it didn't stay put. So this turned out to be a good solution. And, it's better than trying to remove it from the land, since we are so shallow there, and everybody, the town water comes from the island, aquifer
Sure.
under the island. Thank you.
Yep. David Dow had raised his hand to ask a question. There's a question in the chat. Since the state and federal governments have biodiversity restoration plans for the ocean, including for eelgrass and salt marshes, will those plans encompass sand mining and beach nourishment projects, which alter the land and sea boundary? And I don't know if Ashley or Meg, you're prepared to answer that question. If not, feel free to wave that off. But I think it's an interesting question as to how the state's plans will all mesh together to address this issue as coastal resilience and erosion and storm severity becomes a growing issue. You want to tackle that, our speakers?
I'll take a stab at it. I don't know about those particular types of restoration projects, but as I mentioned, the Plymouth Beach Renourishment Project was allegedly for the purpose of biodiversity enhancement for the piping plovers, et cetera. And I do want to emphasize that a big part of what's being mined and at least southeastern Mass and Plymouth County are the boulders. And we see that all along the cliffs in Plymouth. They're being armored. We also have a section of Plymouth that has 100-foot cliffs. And there's any number of projects. You can see the trucks coming from Carver with the boulders and placing them on the beach and also at the tops of the bluffs. And one question I might have is, do you, Ashley, or anyone know what the state's position is on, this alteration and accretion? These projects in Plymouth, every month, there's one on the Conservation Commission agenda where they approve this intensive industrial scale alteration with an order of conditions. It just seems to me quite reckless.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, we were told the state and like our own regulations don't really allow for conversion of one resource area to another. Like bouldering to beach, those sorts of things. So I might be a little off in answering this question, but I know like locally and some of the state CZM guidelines are trying to steer away from the hard armoring projects that require like so much sacrificial nourishment and actually do true ecological restoration where you have a native shoreline created. And you might try and help the landscape convert from, bluff to dune or beach to marsh. So it's a little less harsh, and that does try and work with the system. I know locally with beach nourishment, one of the big worries in permitting is burying eelgrass habitat, because we do have some big restoration projects in our harbor going on, and then burying this unique cobble habitat that's off the bluff. So that was a really big issue in our permitting.
Thanks, Ashley. Somebody asked on the chat if Mass Sierra Club has taken a position on this issue, and Mass Sierra Club reached out to the Cape Cod and Islands group, and together we agreed to definitely support the call for a moratorium on sand mining in southeastern Massachusetts until a new framework is put in place. See if there's any other questions on the chat. People were asking Ashley where on the island are they getting the sand from, or were they getting the sand from, and what else is it used for on the island?
So, construction concrete is the other use for sand. We used to use it instead of salting the roads, and that stopped probably 10 years ago. So about 10 years ago, the sand uses really shift from kind of construction and winter road maintenance and some cranberry bog to coastal projects. And it's all coastal projects now. The sand pits are mid-island. And they do move sand around. So when they are like, if they dig a house foundation and it looks okay, it might get delivered to a coastal project as well.
So somebody asked a question, is the sand being used for concrete making, construction? And please take a look at the chat. There are some great answers coming in from Meg on how the sand is being used and who's using the sand. Going to asphalt and concrete batching facilities. So that's sort of a traditional construction use, but I think this beach replenishment use is really become more and more prevalent over the last decade. And sort of the question for local conservation commissions and entities like Cape Cod Commission, as well as the state, is what are we going to do about this this issue of armoring and replenishment and nourishment, given the threats of climate change, are only really sort of licking the tongue of the dune, and in a lot of cases, and that it's likely to get worse before it gets better. And so my interest and the interest of the Sierra Club Cape Cod and Islands group in having a discussion on this topic was to sort of raise the supply and demand side questions, and then see if there's interest in trying to push the state to take a step back and to look forward and make sure that the next set of coastal resiliency regulations address this issue in a substantive way. The initial set of coastal resiliency regulations, I think they were called Resilience 1.0. We had a Tuesday talk on that back in March. Did not get into sand mining and use, but I think that these are the kind of issues that are only going to get more and more important, and that advocates should not only consider signing on to the moratorium, the petition that Meg mentioned today. And Meg, if you can put a link to that in the chat, I think that would be helpful for our attendees. But also to sort of look around what's going on in your community with uses of sand. Where's the sand coming from, and where's it going? Where's it going? Does anybody else in the audience have any questions or comments? So Meg did put the petition in the chat. And I don't know if your jaws are down and you don't have any questions, if that's part of it. Having seen all those images of massive sand pits and then massive sand piles on the beach washing away. But we'll stay on for another minute or so in case anybody has any questions. Well, I'll ask one for you, Ashley. Is there a sense that the Sconset Beach project is going to move forward? I know that the current one is sort of in limbo because they haven't come up to compliance. Are they going to be required to come up to compliance? And then, what's the use of dumping 100,000 yards of sand all at once? Is that really what they're calling for? And then how many barges does that take to get over there?
All good questions. So given the dynamic of the Conservation Commission right now, I think the expansion project will pass. The Nantucket Select Board over the past couple of years has removed every individual that they can that was opposed to this project, including me. So I do think that'll happen. The makeup plan isn't dumping like 100,000 cubic yards all at once, so that would be done year by year, adding a little bit of extra. That is a condition I'm fairly certain Sconset Beach Preservation Fund will fight and probably appeal to the state. So I have a feeling some of the conditions in place to protect the environment there are going to hopefully be pretty like rigid and rigorous, and that will make this group appeal to the state. But I think it will be approved.
Okay, thanks for that. I know we have a couple coastal experts on the line. If you're interested or willing to give your thoughts on what the state might be doing or what local entities might be doing to address these issues, that would be great. Feel free to take the mic. Otherwise, we'll close for the night. Okay, well, everybody, I want to thank you all for coming to tonight's presentation. Really great job by Meg and Ashley. Thank you so much. Here on Cape Cod, we're kind of sandwiched between Southeastern Mass and Nantucket in a way, but we're facing the same issues. And I think there's some advantage to be gained in people concerned about the supply and the use to work together, and hopefully we'll see some of that in the future. So thanks everybody for coming tonight. Our next Tuesday talk next month will be October 15th, and it will be actually in person as well as via Zoom. It's going to be held at Cape Cod Museum of Natural History in Brewster, and there will be presentations from wildlife experts on the effects of rodenticides on raptors and other wildlife, and presentations from Mass Audubon and others who are interested in ensuring that local communities are working to develop additional protections for the use of chemicals, not just rodenticides, but pesticides in our local environments, given not just the wildlife concerns, but the concerns about our water quality and our soil source aquifer. So mark your calendars for October 15th next month, and I wish you all a great night. Thank you.
I just wanted to jump in and say I put a link to get the news letter from Community Land and Water if anyone's interested. I just put it in the chat.
Yeah, thanks for that, Rachel. And if anybody wants to click on that or visit communitylandandwater.org, you can sign up, and you can also get links to some great resources on the sand wars in Cranberry County. So thanks, everybody, and have a great night.
Thank you very much. Very informative.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for
Thank
having me.
you.